Hello. In November of 1854, a special railway line was created to transport the dead bodies and their families from London to a place called Brookwood in Surrey. It was known as the Necropolis Railway. Are you ready to join me on this journey? My name is April, and this is Gather on the Grave. The Necropolis Railway was set up by the London Necropolis Company. It was the brainchild of Sir Richard Braun. But why was this needed? Well, by this time, London was becoming extremely overcrowded. Between 1801 and 1857, the population of London swelled in numbers, from just under 1 million to over 2.5 million. Traditionally, people were buried in and around local churches, and very old graves were dug up and used again to free up space. Despite the population boom, the amount of space for burials remained the same. Graveyards became extremely congested, and the decaying corpses affected the water supply, causing regular epidemics of cholera, along with typhoid, smallpox, and measles. Between 1848 and 1849, London had one of the worst outbreaks of cholera, which killed 14,601 people. This completely overwhelmed the burial system, and corpses were left piled in the street, waiting to be put into the ground. Just before this epidemic, there was a royal commission that was set up to investigate the burial situation. Its conclusion, funny enough, was that the graveyards had become overcrowded. So because of the epidemic and the amount of public concern, an act was passed in 1851 that prohibited any new burials in built-up areas. Also, 7 new graveyards were built outside the city. But Sir Richard Braun and a man called Richard Spry thought up another solution. They purchased an enormous plot of land in a place called Brookwood near Woking in Surrey. It was far enough away from the city so it wouldn't interrupt city growth. This plot would become known as Brookwood Cemetery, or the London Necropolis, and would be big enough to accommodate all city burials for centuries to come. Indeed, at the time, it was the largest cemetery in the world. They would use the newly created railways to transport the mourners and the bodies easily and cheaply to the new cemetery. The railway mostly ran along the existing tracks of the London and South Western Railway, but had branches at the main line at both London and Brookwood. The dedicated London terminus and the company's offices was located at Waterloo. Braun envisaged coffin trains carrying up to 50 to 60 bodies, travelling to Brookwood either during early morning or late at night, where they would be stored until the funeral. Mourners would then travel to Brookwood during the day in dedicated trains. On reaching the cemetery, trains would be diverted down specific tracks to different parts of the cemetery, one for Anglicans and one for nonconformists or people who did not want a Church of England funeral. Even the station waiting rooms and the compartments of trains, both living and dead, were partitioned off to stop people from different classes and religions from mixing. So 3 types of tickets were created: first, second, and third class. These came with different types of perks. The first class ticket will allow the funeral buyer to choose a plot anywhere in the cemetery without coffin specifications. It was expected that these people would build a permanent memorial in due course to their loved ones. This ticket cost £2.10, which in today's money would be £250. The second class ticket cost £1, which is £100 today, and allowed certain controls over the burial plot. If you wanted to build a permanent memorial, this would cost an additional 10 shillings. If no permanent structure was built, the LNC had the right to use the plot in the near future. And the third-class ticket was reserved for paupers, those buried at the parish expense. They would be buried in an area of the cemetery reserved for the parish. The LNC was forbidden to use mass graves, so even a pauper was given a personal plot. The families could pay for an upgrade from third class if they wanted to build a permanent memorial. The London South Western Railway, or the LSWR as I will now refer to, gave the LNC permanent loans of trains for this specific purpose. The reasons for that was that there were concerns from the public that they might be sitting in trains that held bodies the previous week, which really freaked them out.
When the bodies were transported without the mourners, they would be put into hearse vans. The LNC had required 6 of these at the beginning of operation. When a new terminus was built in London, the company received 2 new hearse vans, which were longer and could carry up to 24 bodies.
There was no special train used, just any that suited the purpose, near to the operation or to the end of the line.
The trains that were used were the M7 class locomotive. Although segregated, the carriages were very similar design, the main difference being the decoration on the doors.
After some opposition to the scheme, the LNC's first funeral took place on the 13th of November 1854.
The Anglican part of Brookwood had been consecrated on the 7th by Charles Sumner, the Bishop of Winchester. Funeral trains would leave from London at 11:35 a.m. or 11:20 a.m. on Sundays and arrive at Necropolis Junction at 12:25 or 12:20 on the Sunday.
After the 1st of October 1900, the Sunday service was discontinued, and after 2 years, the daily service was cancelled. The trains only ran when there were coffins and mourners waiting at the London terminus. These trains were capable of transporting a large amount of mourners when required. The LNC would put on extra trains if needed, for example in the event of public figures dying.
In July of 1938, 155 mourners attended the funeral of a very popular businessman, Sir Nawaji Sakatwala.
Now, as well as mourners and the newly dead, the trains were used to transport reinterred remains, along with the original headstones from congested graveyards.
The first relocation of a graveyard took place in 1862, when the construction of Charing Cross railway station meant that the graveyard at Cures College in Southwark had to be demolished.
Approximately 7,950 bodies were exhumed. They were packed in 220 large containers, each holding 26 corpses, both adults and children, to Brookwood, costing 3 shillings per body. At least 21 graveyards were relocated by the Necropolis Railway, and numerous others by road when the railway was closed. So what happened when the mourners reached the cemetery? There were 2 stations at Brookwood, north and south. Both stations had waiting rooms for the first class and ordinary passengers, along with refreshment rooms, and apartments for the LNC staff. The train crew would usually wait in the refreshment rooms until the train is ready to go back to London. But on at least one occasion, the driver got so drunk that the firemen had to drive the train back. This prompted some complaints from the LSWR, and from then on, the LNC provided the train crew with a free lunch, provided that they only drank 1 pint of beer.
Neither stations were equipped with gas or electricity, and throughout their existence the buildings were lit by oil lamps and coal ranges were used for heating and cooking. On arrival, the coffins would be unloaded and put on a hand-drawn bier, similar to this one, where they would be taken to the appropriate chapel.
Whilst this was happening, the mourners would be escorted to the waiting rooms. Then a short ceremony would be held in the chapel, if it had not already been held. If it had, the coffins would be taken straight to the burial plot.
The North Station served the Roman Catholics, Parsis, Jews and non-conformist Christians, as well as some groups with dedicated plots in the Northern Cemetery, such as actors and Oddfellows. The South Station was in the Anglican section, further down the branch line, and had an Anglican chapel next to it. There is also a military section where between 1942 and 1944 many Allied service personnel were buried. In 1863, with the cemetery fully operational and a new lunatic asylum planned for nearby, which was likely to boost traffic, the LNC decided to build another station on the main line, which they called Brookwood Station. This was opened in 1864.
So, we've talked about the stations at Brookwood. Let's now concentrate on the London terminus. Sir Richard Braun suggested a site near Waterloo for the original terminus, because the proximity to the Thames meant the bodies can be brought by water from other parts of London. It was also easily accessible by road. The arches of the viaducts were easily converted into mortuaries. Braun also felt that the journey out of London from Waterloo would be less distressing for the mourners, as other routes through London went through residential areas and tunnels.
Architect William Tite and engineer William Cubitt
drew up plans that were approved in 1864. Their designs were based around a 3-story building. It housed 2 mortuaries, the LNC boardroom, the funerary workshops, and waiting rooms. A discreet entrance round the back allowed mourners to come and go, without the need for hearses to be parked on the public street. A steam-powered lift would allow coffins to be brought from the lower levels to the platform levels above. The original terminus did not have its own chapel. One of the waiting rooms would then be used to conduct the service. However, due to congestion, a new site was constructed in 1902 on the opposite side of Westminster Bridge Road. This new building was designed for its attractiveness and modernity. They wanted to move away from the usual gloominess of the funeral industry.
A narrow 4-story building held the LNC's offices. Behind it was the main terminal. This held a communal 3rd-class waiting room, mortuaries and storerooms, LNC's workshop, and a sumptuous oak-panelled chapelle al dente, intended for mourners unable to make the journey to Brookwood. This building led onto the 2 platforms lined with waiting rooms and ticket office.
However, during the night of the 16th and 17th of April 1941, during the last major bombing raids, Waterloo was hit. The Necro trains that were stored in the sidings were burned and part of the archway was damaged. Luckily, the terminus remained unscathed. That is until 10:30 p.m, where multiple incendiary devices and high explosives struck the central section of the terminus building. Apart from the platforms and the offices, everything else was destroyed. In 1945, the company bosses met to discuss whether to continue or not. Although the main line to Brookwood remained in use and was in good condition, the branch line into the cemetery had not been used since 1941 and was in poor condition. Also, the scheme that Braun envisaged was not as popular as he first thought. In the 87 years that the LNC had been in operation, only 203,042 burials took place, as opposed to the 5 million burials that they calculated in their first proposal. Before the outbreak of hostilities and the decreased use of road transport had damaged the profitability for both the LNC and the Southern Railway. Faced with the cost of rebuilding and replacing the rolling stock that was damaged or destroyed, The directors concluded that past experiences and present changed conditions made the running of the Necropolis private train obsolete. In 1946, the LNC declared to the SWR that the Westminster Bridge terminus would not be reopening.
The last ever funeral to take place at Brookwood was that of a Chelsea pensioner, Edward Irish, on the 11th of April 1941.
So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the history of the Necropolis Railway. Thank you for taking this journey with me today. You can now disembark. The LNC was forbidden to use mass graves, so even a pauper was given a personal plot. So even a pauper was used. Out of London from Waterloo would be less distressing for the mourners, and allowed certain